Hello friends, Lee C. Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Dr. Terence Lester. Terence is an academic, an activist, storyteller who's a professor at Simmons College in Kentucky. Today we're discussing his new book, From Dropout to Doctorate, Breaking the Chains of Educational Injustice. This is a particularly moving and inspiring interview with Terence, and I hope that you will find it moving and inspiring as well, with some very beautiful and practical takeaways for ways we might make significant contributions to the world around us. Enjoy. Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter. Do you love No Small Endeavor? Well, for as little as $5 a month, you can become an NSC Plus subscriber and take your listening even deeper. Here's what you'll get: ad-free episodes, exclusive bonus episodes from me, and full access to my in-depth series on the cardinal virtues. Plus, you'll be invited to our quarterly book clubs, a chance to read, reflect, and connect with our community. And starting this month, a brand new series, which I'm calling Bunyan-like Progress, my memoirish tale of a boy from Alabama and what it's meant both to forsake and hold on to my Bible Belt roots. And you won't just be getting perks, you'll be supporting conversations that listeners describe as life-giving, thought-provoking, and even how I'm surviving the current political environment. So, if you've found No Small Endeavor meaningful in your own life, join us for as little as $5 a month. You'll help us keep bringing thoughtful, respective dialogue to the world and get even more of the content you love. And if you can do more than $5 a month, you'll all the more make possible the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Subscribe today at the link in the show notes, or go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. Again, that's nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Dr. Terence Lester is a nationally recognized storyteller, scholar, and activist whose journey from high school dropout to PhD fuels his mission to serve marginalized communities. He's the founder of the nonprofit Love Beyond Walls, leading nationwide campaigns on poverty and homelessness that have reached millions. A professor at Simmons College of Kentucky, he's also the author of 5 books, including his latest, From Dropout to Doctorate. Welcome, Dr. Lester.
Hey, Lee. Really excited to be here today.
Pleased to have you with us and grateful for your time and looking forward to hearing some of your story. I'm fascinated with this experiment that you did in 2013 of setting out to seek to live as a homeless person in Atlanta. What was that? When you think back to that experience, I would love first just a glimpse of what are some of the just detailed sensory experiences that you remember from that experiment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember my family dropping me off underneath a bridge in the heart of Atlanta. It was in December, and as a matter of fact, it was 3 days before Christmas. I remember sharing this experiment that I would be doing, or a demonstration that I would be living outside on social media. And the goal was to raise awareness about what it means to be an unhoused person every single second, not just in someone passing by and you seeing someone on the streets without an address for a brief moment of time. But I wanted to walk through those experiences and then answer the question, how might I serve this population and stand in solidarity with them? And so I didn't take anything, no change of clothes. Everything I had was in a book bag, and my family allowed me to live on the streets for a little over a month. And when I first arrived, I had already established relationships with this community. And I'll never forget this gentleman named Robert walking up to me. He greeted me. He walked me around. He introduced me to the community, and everybody just welcomed me. And it was so humbling because here it was, I was an outsider coming into this community. It was freezing cold. And I saw this community rally around me to get me a tent, to donate me blankets, to get me a pair of socks when my feet got wet and cold, to talk to me about their own vulnerabilities and their sufferings, to show me what it meant to survive on the streets. I remember standing around a fire pit, right, and throwing donated clothes into this fire because there was no firewood. There was there was no thermostat that I could walk over to a wall and control the temperature of a home. And it was really humbling. But I remember building relationships with my friends who couldn't afford medication, with my friends who was living on the streets with a terminal illness, with my friends who lost jobs or were living with a disability. I remember these things, and they changed me. And I got a chance to tell these beautiful stories, not of people who should be invisible, but of people who were deserving of love and compassion. And it literally shaped the way that I serve, my heart, my compassion, but it also informed the start of our organization, which is Love Beyond Walls, dedicated to serving those who are unhoused. And with that one campaign, we were able to get 14 people off of the streets. Through reuniting people with their family members, through connecting them with services. And that's when I really started to see the power of storytelling and how it could be used to serve those who are invisible.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's must have been very powerful experiences. And I can imagine the friendships that you've carried from that must continue to resonate with you, I would imagine, in beautiful ways.
Yes.
Yeah. So in your forthcoming book, you share a lot about your own narrative and the ways in which your own story has led you to the sort of solidarity that you're seeking to embody in your own life, and a lot of difficult, many painful stories. I was particularly struck by the story that you tell of kind of a very early experience of coming to your own self-perception with a conversation that your mother had on the phone. Would you share that story with us about when you overheard her talking about the Rodney King beating?
Yeah. Yeah, it was early 90s, and as a very young child, I had to be like 9 or 10 years old, and to date myself, there were no cell phones, right? And there were only a few channels on the television that you could access. Not really a buffet of channels like cable offers today. And I hear my mother frantic. Her voice is crackling, and she's talking to another family member, and it's about something that's happening in real time on the news. They were reporting that Rodney King had just been beaten and by law enforcement, and she was making statements that let me know that I was a Black child, essentially. And I'll never forget the long ride to school. She dropped me off, and I kept having these questions. What does it mean to be a Black boy growing up in the community that we're growing up in, me and my peers? What does it mean to go to a school? I started to notice things that, now in, retrospect, I started to notice the environment that I was growing up in, the way that race was being talked about, and it also started the initial stages of fear of being in a Black body and things like that. And, it did something to me. It let me know that sometimes growing up in these types of environments was synonymous with living with fear, right? Especially during that time frame. And it also let me know that something was different in the world and that I would experience a certain set of circumstances that may be different from others who matriculate through this life.
You, that anxiety that you pointed to, you also share how your sense of, as it runs throughout the book, you're working with lots of notions of generational trauma, which we'll have an opportunity to discuss hopefully here in a few moments. But pointing back to your own early experiences with your mother and sister having to leave your house, and the sort of rise of anxiety in you. But how do you look back on that experience? What do you remember about that experience and what it enkindled in you?
Yeah, I still feel the emotions of that experience. I was growing up in what would be considered a impoverished community. If you can think of the settings, I mean, we've all passed by these, communities where it may be a food desert or dilapidated buildings, or you can sense the divestment where there isn't a lot of thriving there. Mostly in these types of contexts, poverty itself produces crime. And you can imagine people who are fighting for survival are grappling with, how do I make ends meet? And sometimes those choices may result in crime for survival. And all of these things are going on. And here it is, my mother is fleeing, so to speak. There was a lot of social conflict and family angst and violence stemming from my home life. And my mother grabbed me and my younger sister at the time. And I remember this long walk that we were taking away from our home. And I think for me, that was the first time I really grappled with, what does it mean to be at home? What is home? I define home in my book, I See You, as a place where you feel seen, accepted, and you feel this sense of belonging. And home, or this idea or concept of home, was really shattered in many ways early on in my life. And I spent the next years, growing as a young Black male in society where you're grappling with maybe social injustice, being in an impoverished community, also dealing with trauma. All of these, I would call them a trifecta of things, really started to shape me and impact even my own educational outcomes. And I'm sure we'll get into things that I was grappling with while going to school and carrying all of these things.
When you think about that, how old were you at that particular time with your mother fleeing from those sorts of difficulties?
Yeah, I was maybe 5 or 6, and the memories are just as fresh today as they were when they were happening.
When you've looked back at the rise of a sort of persistent anxiety that you then later would deal with and work on in therapy, what were kind of like some of the, looking back in retrospect, what would you say was the nature of that? What were the sorts of persistent ways of trying to deal with the world, of questioning the world, of engaging the world, that began to be enkindled in you think, at that time?
Yeah. I mean, trauma itself is a really, can be a really impactful thing. And I normally tell people now, to be alive is to experience trauma. Like, you don't escape this life having had dealt with something. And that something could be different from somebody else's something. For me, it was impoverishment, where some researchers or clinicians, right, will argue that poverty itself is a form of trauma. It's traumatic to not know where you're going to sleep at night when your mother is fleeing from maybe a domestic violence situation. It's traumatic when you see your single parent work multiple jobs and their absence is felt because they're trying to make it to survive. It's traumatic when you have to go to school and you're being taught a particular subject, but you can't connect with it fully, right? Because you're dealing with your existential reality stemming from your home life, and educators aren't really trauma informed to be able to notice that something deeper is going on, right? It's a reason why you're not connecting to the lessons. And I dealt with all of those things. And you talk about the fear associated with trauma or triggers. I remember one incident, and I talk about it in my book, where I had gone to school one morning and I was mute in a sense. The night before, I just witnessed violence, and that was traumatic for me. And I'm in class, and I remember my teacher going over a lesson, and she's going around the classroom and she's asking students to answer the question. Well, I was one of the students that was called out to answer the question, and I couldn't say anything. It's not because I did not want to. It's because I had so much stemming from my own personal life that I didn't feel the full weight of confidence to connect with education in that way. And I didn't say anything. And instead of the teacher asking me, what's wrong or what happened, she punishes me. She makes me move my desk into a closet. And I still hear the laughter, or I still hear the laughter of my peers. I had to be about first or second grade. My peers laughing at me as I was moving my desk into a closet, and she closed the door. And that was traumatic. And she did not even understand that she was re-traumatizing me, which was the start of what I would consider educational injustice, or this disconnect from what it means to be fully present as a student in class. And so when you ask me questions about how does that shape you, trauma itself can impact every aspect of your life, right? I was just recently talking to a friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and it's a form of suffering, and he's talking about the traumatic experiences of just how life unfolds, period. Life can unfold on you, and it can literally have an impact on how your journey is shaped.
Yeah. The sorts of sense of isolation in that you share how, I don't remember if you frame it in terms of processing, dealing with isolation, but you at least go looking for some sort of sense of solidarity and some sort of sense of family in a gang membership, which again seems to be yet another form of traumatic experience for you.
Yeah. I after experiencing all that, you talk about, now I'm in middle school,
which is such a lovely place to help feel safe.
Right. It's like for the first part of my life as a child, I experienced trauma in home, and then I'm starting to understand that I'm a Black boy in this world, and then I'm seeing the breakdown or the family conflict, right? I'm disconnecting from education because I don't feel like teachers really understand. Being raised by a single mother who is very resilient, and she went on to get her doctorate degree because she was so resilient. And here it is, I found myself in school, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to connect with someone, a community, to feel a sense of community. And I think, as a side note, we're all looking for that, right? We're all looking for a sense of community, to be seen, whether it's in our families, whether it's on our jobs or in the career that we've chosen, whether it's in our profession, whether it's just in a community of faith or wherever you may find yourself. And being seen is more about having the very essence of who you are affirmed, right? Your inherent worth and value. And I sought that out in peers who had just moved from across the country, and they brought gang culture. And that was on the rise during that time. And the way that I saw being affiliated with the gang was not necessarily because I wanted to commit a crime or I wanted to do something that was, devious in society. It was that I wanted to connect with people who saw value in me as being a part of a community. And I think research, I even talk about the research in there, that most young people who actually assimilate into this world is actually looking for community because you grapple so much with the trauma and the isolation, and you want to be connected to something that makes you feel meaningful.
Yeah. As you share in your book, you subsequently drop out of school, and then this begins yet another kind of series of challenges and ways in which you decide to try to re-engage. But you share at one point about an unhoused friend that had a profound impact upon you, which I thought was a beautiful story.
Yeah. I was in school. I was in high school at this point. Excuse me. I was in high school at this point, and by this time I had fallen behind. I was transferred to an alternative school, and this alternative school was called open campus, which means you go to school, you work at your own pace. There's an educator present in the classroom, but it's an open campus. You can come and go as you please. Some teenagers there were working jobs. Some were living out of their cars. Some were, staying in shelters. Some were so impoverished they were dealing with their own set of circumstances. I would describe it as a school with students who were all journeying through something very hard. But that hardness for me was almost like a breaking point. And I remember being in class and just feeling so disconnected from school. And I pushed myself away from the desk in front of the teacher. I get up, I walk out the classroom. A few of my friends followed. I walked straight out of the front of the school building. And I'm walking away, and there was this guy experiencing homelessness. He calls over to our group. We had to be less than 100 yards away from the school. And he's stumbling around, trash hanging from his beard, clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in probably a month. And I was the only person to respond. My friends kept talking. It was almost like an aside in the stage play, right? It's like this scene that's off to the side. I walk over to him and he says, "I don't want any money." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he points back at my school and he says, "Is that your school back there?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Whatever you do, you don't want to end up like me." And he looks himself up and down. He says, "Whatever you do, you're going to have to keep fighting to get your education, because one day you'll be a leader." Just like out of the blue. Wow. This total stranger. And he had no idea that, I had run away from home, experienced a brief moment of homelessness, lived from friend's house to family member's house. He had no idea that I struggled early on with my relationship with my father that later was repaired. I talk about it in the book. He had no idea how I felt out of touch with education. But that moment, that brief moment, became the catalyst of God doing something amazing in my life. I heard him, right? There had been a lot of noise, but here it is, this total stranger who saw something in me and was calling me a leader,
Yeah.
even in the midst of my grief and my context. And that became the stepping stone for me to say, there is more. There is more to this life.
When you think back to those years, who are other figures that in some way, grand or simple, that gave you some sort of grace or some sort of encouragement that made it possible for you to find a way forward?
Yeah, I remember Miss West, Sharia West. She was a teacher that became one of my greatest sources of inspiration. Ended up going back to high school as a fifth-year senior. Somehow my mom worked it out where I didn't have to go and get a GED, and the school allowed me to come back as a fifth-year senior. Most embarrassing moment of my life. The proper term is fifth-year persister. And sometimes you have 6-year persisters, meaning that you don't finish the set amount of classes or courses within the required 4-year traditional time frame. And so I went back, and I remember the educators who labeled me and thought that I would end up dead, locked up, or in jail. I remember the chatter from educators. What is he doing back here? I remember my peers laughing at me walking down the hall. Didn't you graduate the year before? What happened? But, I had learned that if I was going to make it and become that leader that this gentleman who was unhoused told me that I would become, that I would have to persevere in a different way. And I remember Miss West, I was taking geometry, 10th grade class as a fifth-year senior. I would go to school and I had so much pain, emotional trauma, and I would sit in her class and I knew all of the information. It wasn't that I didn't have the intellectual capacity. It was just that I had so much heaviness that I was carrying. And she noticed that. I think this was long before, being trauma informed about the realities of what people suffered through was even being talked about at that time. And she walked up to me one day and she says, "Stay with me at the class." I stayed. She says, "I want you to use this classroom as a sanctuary. I'll mentor you. I'll tutor you. I'll help you get through. But you're a young, Black, brilliant young man, and you're going to make it." And she called me a leader. And
Wow.
she became my greatest source of inspiration. And funny story, later on, I ended up going to the church, same church and all that stuff. But she believed in me, and she was one of the reasons I graduated. My mom, who showed me tough love, who believed that, better was possible, even with not having an example of a male figure in my life that went on to, obtain a college degree and stuff like that. She saw that education was a way out for me. She pushed me sometimes in tough ways, but she continued to believe that I could overcome. And I think a large part of it's a mixture of my resilience comes from both my mother and my father. Mr. Eason, who was a deacon in the church, that I later started attending, heard my story when I was 21 and I was thinking about going to Bible college, who actually helped to pay for my undergrad degree. He was a real estate developer, very wealthy man, but wanted to invest in me because at that time I was doing poetry around the church and serving. And he said that there was something special about me. He's the same guy that walked my wife down the aisle when her dad was in jail. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And the last text he sent me is that he was proud of the man that I've become. And I was one of his greatest investments. And here it is. It's this guy who built subdivisions and developed, all of these, buildings and apartment complexes and owned all this property. And he saw that the greatest call of God was to invest in people. And I was one of them. Mr. Moore, who set me down when I was 17, the night I was going to sleep in a park, who told me to come over to his house to get dinner, who walked up to my car and told me that I was more than my circumstances, and that one day I would use my story to encourage other people navigating these same sets of circumstances, who encouraged me to start Love Beyond Walls, who passed away. All of these people, my professor, Dr. Joe, who allowed me to borrow his car for a year when I was in Bible college, trying to find my way just so I can go to school. You know, all of these strangers who became family. And I think one of my greatest joys now, even in the work that I do, is that now I get to become that same stranger that sees the best in people who've been isolated, who've been made invisible, who feel outcasted, who has a set of circumstances that no one understands, in a way, to live in a way, to show up in a way, to remind people that they are worthy of the love of God.
What beautiful stories. Thank you for those. What was the role of the church, or the role of your faith or coming to faith, or whatever that narrative was? How did that play out in your younger self?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the community itself was a space that gave me a chance to heal, to realize how important faith was, and how God saw value in me despite everything that I had to navigate, grow up with, my social location, the limitations. I'll never forget, I had a friend, and I write about it in a book. He was only going to church to date a girl. I had dropped out of college a couple times because I was still, back and forth. And he invited me to go to church. It was a small church at the time, and he invited me, and I said, yeah. And I go to this men's Bible study, and it's this pastor, really passionate about community issues, all of these things. And he's preaching about the grace of God and how God loved us despite all that we face. And he was preaching through Romans, came across this verse, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And in that moment, I felt like God's love overwhelmed my set of circumstances, if that makes sense. And I gave my life to the Lord. And then I started to realize that church was a place that could become a safe space, a place of lament, a place where I could grow and gain wisdom from people who've journeyed through life. And I was a younger guy too, and a lot of my friends weren't necessarily connected to church. So I started hanging out with people twice my age, gleaning wisdom from deacons, and soaking up all of the wisdom I could, asking questions. I normally tell young people today that the best thing that you can become is a questionary, right? Not just a visionary, but someone who dares to ask the hard questions from people who have made mistakes or had successes, where you can actually glean wisdom from them. And I did that because I did not have people in my life at the time who could teach me how to tie a tie, or teach me what books to read, or teach me these types of things based on the environment that I came from. And man, church changed my life. It gave me hope. It gave me faith. It restored me. I met my wife. I actually celebrate my anniversary on Monday, and I'll make 19 years of marriage, right? My family is the most important thing to me. My kids, we get a chance to serve them in a way where we're tearing down what we would perceive as generational limitations, right? I read a quote one time that says, if generational trauma can come from one generation to the next, so can generational healing, right? And so we've made that a core value. We're living our lives in a way where we're trying to pass this on to our children. But I got all of that in church, right? How to be a man, how to grow up and have integrity, how to have character, how to serve. We talked about Jesus in a way that opened my eyes, that made me realize I have something to offer. And that was born out of the pain that I experienced.
Thank you for that. It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today.
Purina believes no one should have to make the impossible choice between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit purina.com/purple to learn more.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 50% off primetime deals and free professional installation. Rules and restrictions apply.
I'm still stuck on some of those pictures that you shared with us of this kind of persistent, all this heavy weight you're carrying with you, say, to school, and grappling with stopping, starting, whether to keep going, how to keep going. And I'm wondering, what would you identify as key elements that gave you, in the end, enough grit or enough persistence to keep on going rather than just lying down in despair or lying down in self-pity?
It's a great, great question. And I would say community. I talk a lot about that throughout the book. And you'll notice that it's not a large community. You know, I'm not talking about a room full of people. It's the strangers that became family. It's the Mr. Easons. It's the Miss West. It's the Mr. Moores. It's the Mr. Artie Shaws. It's people who allowed me to borrow their courage and belief until I had my own. And sometimes I realized throughout the journey that I just had to remain open and listen. And sometimes that takes courage, especially for someone who's experienced a certain level of trauma, because your trust is kind of broken. And I think one of the things that faith taught me, especially in the context of a community of faith, is that God sets the solitude in families. God restores your ability to trust again. God can connect you to people who can be life-giving. And it's funny that you asked that question. I was asked here recently, what would I tell my younger self who was caught in that place or that cycle? And my response was simple, is that you will find the community that believes in you. You will develop the confidence that you need to continue to take steps. You will find the courage and have your gifts and talents discovered in a way where you can serve your community. You do have something to offer the world, and nothing that you've gone through, it has the power to limit you. And I think I started to believe that based upon the community that I was connected to, people reminding me that your trauma, your suffering, your limitations, the poverty, the systemic injustice, all of those things do not have the power to define you. And I definitely think being connected to the right community is one of the greatest things that has changed the trajectory, is one of the greatest things that has changed the trajectory of my life. And not only my life, but my children's life.
Mm.
Yeah.
When in a great deal of your work, and in this book in particular, you're talking a lot about generational trauma. Give us just a short 1 to 2 sentence definition of generational trauma.
Yeah. Well, I think it's two parts. It can be historical trauma as well as personal trauma, right? And I think one can feed the other. For instance, my grandmother, who grew up in the 1930s, born in 1932, remembers the history, right, of not being able to go to certain parts of town, et cetera, working in certain stores. That's historical trauma, that Black people carry based upon the history in this country. And then there's social or personal trauma. It's what you experience as a result of historical things. It can be impoverishment. It can be, a form of abuse. It can be, a limited mindset or mentality. It can be the ways in which you model or catch things that are modeled or displayed to you. And I think in my mind, they can be separated, but the way that I'm talking about them in the context of the book is that one is actually feeding the others. Because I talked to my dad before he passed, and he talked about how he grew up. That gave me a chance to humanize him and understand some of the choices that he made based upon the history. And so I guess if I had to define generational trauma, I'm talking about a set of harmful experiences that can be passed down from generation to generation until those things are broken.
So the nature of them being passed down, do you see that primarily in terms of attitudes towards engagement with the world, or what would be the particulars that you have especially paid attention to as to how those traumas get passed from one generation to the next?
Yeah, I mean, just take, for instance, education, right? My dad didn't go to college and didn't finish school. He grew up in the 60s, 70s, was in an impoverished environment in DC. And the trauma of being in that context produced this limited perspective of the power of education. My dad eventually became an entrepreneur and became successful at what he did, but just think about the ways in which our conversations were related to education. He experienced a trauma in his life based upon his social location, the historical injustices that were invasive in that community during that time frame, the way that schools were underfunded, the community that he lived in that produced educational outcomes that weren't as beneficial to him. That could have been passed along, right? Where maybe I didn't finish high school, or maybe I didn't believe that education has the power to do or create opportunities or grow me in ways like that. Could have been passed down. That's just something as simple. And what if I didn't finish high school? Would that have been passed down to my children, right? And that type of cycle can be passed down from generation to generation. And that's just one thing. And I do want to shout out to my dad. My dad passed away last year. He actually became one of my best friends towards the latter part of his life. I was there when he was making his transition. He allowed me to become his caregiver. He allowed me to see him vulnerable. I was there when he gave his life to the Lord. I have audio recordings of him saying the way that I lived my life and what I overcame gave him the faith to believe in God. And I still listen to that to this day. He was there to call me doctor when I actually finished my PhD, and tell people who were over to my house, that he was proud of me. And man, I just look back sometimes over my life and the struggles, and I'm not saying that limitations aren't harmful, but the limitations was used for good. And when I talk about goodness, I'm talking about, man, I had to model grit and resilience, and God did something in my life so powerful that I was able to reconnect and restore a relationship with my dad in a way that now I feel proud to carry on his legacy. I talk about healing and stuff towards the latter part of the book. And you talk about generational trauma, but I also see that as an opportunity for generational healing. That my dad was able to see me achieve something that he never got a chance to. Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful thing. And he is still reaching people through me. Although we had our differences, God restored our relationship in a way. And I see a part of himself even in me, the way that he was an entrepreneur, the way that he had drive and innovation and some of the things that were really good about him. And that is reflective in the man that you see today. And I want to honor him as well.
Yeah. Thank you. It seems that so often many of the ongoing mechanisms of traumatization, because we tend not to have a very long historical consciousness in American culture, we miss some of these. But you point to some of these. So, for example, the Nixon administration and the war on drugs, in which that then has had intense effects upon incarceration rates, and those incarceration rates related to disproportionately targeting Black young men. How do you, what would you say you think are some of the most overlooked or misunderstood or insufficiently considered mechanisms of societal traumatization that you're especially wanting to draw people's attention to?
Yeah. I use a framework in the book where I talk about the interconnectedness of all of the things that you mentioned, right? So you have maybe racism or injustice that then produces public policy, right? That's what you mentioned. Targeted policing, racial disparities, mass incarceration, which causes broken families, economic divestment, job loss, police violence, community distrust, neglect, and violence on public health as well as education. That then, let's just say, even redlining, right? That concentrates poverty in a certain area, right? Where you have a lot of communities of color, and in this instance, Black communities that are still grappling with generational trauma. Right? Why? Because public policy and redlining forced poverty into Black communities. And then, okay, you talk about policy, which creates the social living conditions, right? Flash, Grandmaster, and I think has this song where he's like, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head." And he's he's using these the Furious Five, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. He's talking about, if you go back and listen to that song, all of the things, broken glass everywhere, people in the hallways feeling like they just don't care. He's talking about the social living conditions of what poverty does, hunger, drugs being in the community, crime. There's no economic upward mobility for a community. That's the social living conditions, right? The social living conditions in turns produces trauma, right? And so not only are you dealing with injustice, policy, social living conditions. Now you're being traumatized by all of that, and also dealing with your own sense of self and your own trauma, right? And these generational things, and those produces outcomes, poor health in communities, food deserts, why it's hard for people to access higher education, not access to opportunities in terms of careers. All of these things, like, they're interconnected, and it takes you knowing history, understanding those effects. I'm a product of those environments, right? I was there. I grew up, I was born in the 1980s. I remember the administration that was current and some of the social framing and political rhetoric, right? That was framing Black communities as welfare queens and getting over on the system, or leveraging an aspect of the GI Bill, which was the GED, right? To say if you get your GED while you're Black, you're lesser than, which is one of the reasons I decided to go back as a fifth year senior. I remember my mom talking about not having a lot of job opportunities, even though she graduated college from an HBCU and all those things. I grew up in those conditions, right? And so as I've continued to journey forward and have overcome, like, sometimes it's easy for an audience to say, oh, look at that person, they're successful, and try to use one person's success to define millions of others who may still be entrapped in those types of social living conditions, does such grave injustice and has a limited perspective. You can't use one celebrity, one successful person to define a whole generation or a community that is still grappling with the generational social living conditions, poverty, the residue from harsh policies, all of those things. You can't do that. And you have to have a broader perspective.
We'd love to hear some of the ways through either Love Beyond Walls or the Open Doors initiative that you are seeking to address some of these and continue to provide resources for others to make progress.
Yeah, it's a great question. With Love Beyond Walls, we are servicing those who are unhoused in two ways. One, we are, I call it narrative justice or storytelling advocacy. We launched the first museum in the United States that represents the subject of homelessness. It's called the Dignity Museum. We lead tours and give people a chance to really grapple with some of the more complex subjects. What causes homelessness? How is homelessness not monolithic? How is it unique to every single story? We talk about homelessness being a global issue and not something only relegated to a couple people standing on a street corner, right? There's, over 100 million people who have inadequate housing in the entire world. We give people a chance to get proximate to the stories of those who we've helped to transition out of homelessness. We also help people recover ID, reunite with family members. Sometimes people don't even understand. It's hard to get identification, something as basic as a social security card or a birth certificate, because you need ID to get what? ID, and you need an address to validate who you are as a person. So we do a lot of work around reframing what it means to stand in solidarity with a part of community who's been beloved. We talk about public policy that targets those who are unhoused. But we also have, access to public sanitation. We were the organization that went viral for placing hand washing stations in the streets during the height of COVID. We started with 15 in Atlanta, have hand washing stations in over 100 cities across the country. We help people find access to temporary housing until they can get stable. We have a food co-op. Right now, we're building resource centers within the context of Title I schools called Zion's Closet. for students who are unhoused, right? I remember being that child. So parents can go into this resource closet and wash clothes. There's washing machines and dryers, access to healthy foods. I remember a student walking in the resource center that we built and didn't have on any socks, and their shoes were broken, and they get a chance to get a fresh pair of shoes, and they weren't able to connect with their lesson because they were so focused on the lack and the immediate need. Wi-Fi labs for parents to come in and fill out job applications because the digital divide is real. Some families don't have access to technology, right? With Simmons, I remember, even in Louisville, right before school ended with the Open Doors Initiative, I helped to organize a conference for high school seniors. It was about 50 who were unhoused and about to graduate high school. The first time that they had ever been to a college fair was at this conference. Simmons College was present. The first time some of these students had ever heard about college as an option, what a FAFSA was. The ability to dream beyond maybe living in a motel or living out of a car with their families, or even dream of themselves having something to offer. I mean, they've done the hard work of maintaining good grades while going through the worst part of their life. And now they have an opportunity to be inspired by an institution that is giving them an opportunity to say, hey, we're a college and we would love to have you. We would love to give you an on-board to higher education. And so my work is centered around how can I create a world where no one feels invisible, but namely those who have been excluded and pushed to the side. And my work is greater than a political conversation. It's about a moral one. It's about how do we do the right thing and show up as a good neighbor. And most times when we talk about loving our neighbors, we also have to love the neighborhood that neighbor emerges from, and also be concerned with the challenges that neighborhood faces.
That's inspiring and a beautiful work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing that. I have kind of two questions as we move toward a close. One, I'm wondering how you have responded to especially Black conservatives, Black political conservatives, social conservatives, who have insisted upon critiques of systemic critiques themselves, that seem to want to reduce problems to, as I read them at least, individual choice and things of that matter. But any thoughts or the ways that you've processed those sorts of critiques?
Yeah. Do you mind if I read something?
No, please.
So to frame this, I was talking to a group of people about the state of poverty in our world. And, I get the normal poverty is a result of not working hard enough. If you can work, there is no excuse. But when I was speaking about it, or when this person actually responded with that, I thought about the lack of awareness and how easily it is to rely on social constructs that can sometimes impair our perspective and cause greater harm. And I responded to the person with, it's 2025. The federal minimum wage is still $7.25 in 30 states. Could you survive on that with your current lifestyle? And of course, the answer was no. And I thought about how still many of these socially framed narratives about poverty began gaining traction in the 1980s, but people continue to still hold on to these single story narratives, calling others lazy or accusing them of getting over on the system without ever examining the lens they've inherited or how that distorts their view of poverty. People who believe poverty is about a lack of motivation or financial literacy rarely acknowledge how the systemic nature of poverty itself can impair your progress. Poverty can exhaust you until you have nothing left to give and rob you of your dreams. So I responded by saying this: poverty is not just about income. It's social, it's environmental, it's emotional, it's occupational. Sometimes it's spiritual, it's physiological, it's psychological, and so much more. Coretta Scott King said this, the wife of Martin Luther King: poverty is violence. It doesn't just touch one part of your life, it invades your whole life. And most people don't talk about how poverty itself is a form of trauma. It's traumatic to not have enough and still be expected to perform at your best. It's traumatic to be burdened to the point of breakdown and then be blamed for not having enough. And the truth is, many people living in poverty work incredibly hard. I personally remember my mom working 50 and 60 hours a week and still having more a month at the end of her money. So when somebody starts talking about productivity and effort as a measure of worthiness for people who don't have, they haven't considered how much poverty or how much grit or resilience it takes to survive poverty, right? And I will end with this. Dr. King, one of the last campaigns that he was doing was in Memphis. He was taking a stance with sanitation workers, and he was really talking about poverty. And he said these words: as long as there is poverty in this world, no man can be truly rich or totally rich, even if he has $1 billion. So when I talk about poverty, sometimes I think, those who try to blame people have not had enough proximity with those people. And when I read the text in scripture as Jesus asking, how can I serve? My favorite lines in the scriptures is and Jesus saw. And I want to be a person of seeing, not using someone's lack or limitation as a reason to define them. So my question is to those: how do you serve? How do you broaden your perspective? How do you ask, how can I be compassionate in a world where there is so much lack around me, and not having a posture of separation and exclusion and saying I need to be cold-hearted and closed-fisted?
That's beautifully put. Thank you so much for that. That guides us to the last question I wanted to ask, and you've kind of indicated some of this along the way, but I would ask, just kind of as a closing gift to us, as you think about the ways in which you've had to process your own healing and your own processing of those deep traumas that you had as a child. What's been key to you in that, and how would you encourage those who still see their own kind of traumas that they've not yet been able to sufficiently navigate or learn how to navigate? What would you send us away with?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things that I've learned is finding the courage to name things. And naming your pain is not just a place where you're trying to name something to just vomit out the things that you've been through. I think it is naming it in a way where you can understand it, where you can be vulnerable and find strength. I think some of my greatest strength and my resilience has come from acknowledging the fact that I experienced what I experienced, and learning from it, and also realizing that some of the greatest words and treasures and gifts have shaped me, and it has derived from the things that I've experienced. I am who I am because I experienced what I experienced. And I think also finding a safe community. Obviously, I believe in the power of therapy. One of my grad degrees is in counseling. And, I found value in processing and not overwhelming yourself, but taking small steps. I'm not saying name it right away, but I'm saying start with a safe community where you can begin to process and say out loud the things that have happened until you find the courage and confidence where you feel vulnerable enough to share. But there's power in vulnerability, and I think being vulnerable has been a safe haven for me. It's made me a more transparent leader. It has allowed me to connect with other people who are also suffering and realizing that I'm not alone. And it has given me such courage to continue to show up and serve those around me. I mean, when I think about my pain, I can't think about my pain without thinking about how God has pulled purpose from it.
Talking to Dr. Terence Lester, professor at Simmons College in Kentucky, founder of the nonprofit Love Beyond Walls, discussing his latest book, From Dropout to Doctorate. Terence, thank you so much. It's been a beautiful conversation, and so grateful for your work and the sharing with us that you did today in your own exercises of vulnerability. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. I was very honored to be here with you.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
If you love No Small Endeavor, I suspect you will not want to miss joining us in Nashville for our Thanksgiving variety show on November 23. This year, we'll be joined by Sharon McMahon, #1 New York Times bestselling author and podcaster. Sharon is a longtime government and law educator who became known as America's government teacher during the 2020 election, when she went viral for breaking down complex topics with a steadfast commitment to the facts. It'll be a night of thoughtful conversation, moving music, and a room full of folks all in pursuit of no small endeavor. This year it's at the beautiful Skirmerhorn Symphony Center here in Nashville. We'll be joined by the Choir Room, Grammy award-winning artist Allison Russell, and a full band for an amazing night you will not want to miss. Mark your calendars for November 23, and don't wait. Go get your tickets now at the link in the show notes or at nosmallendeavor.com/events.